Hello and welcome back to Modern World History, where in this video we're going to continue our discussion on World War II by talking about the actual war itself. And so in the last video we looked at how appeasement had been the policy, the strategy of getting Hitler and Mussolini and the Japanese to just simply stop. If you let them take it all, they're eventually going to take everything they need and want, and they're not going to be aggressive anymore. But we know that that isn't the way it panned out, not even a little bit. And so, to make matters even more glum, the Non-Aggression Pact was an agreement between Russia and Germany. Now, wait a second. We already know from talking in an earlier video that the communist ideology and the fascist ideology are on opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to how they believe in society should be. Communists are all about the workers being in control, and the workers, basically everyone being part of the working class, and there can be no ethnic or nationalistic differences between those workers. And fascists are extremely nationalistic. And they're ethnocentric. Okay, and so we know that these differences exist, and therefore, really, Germany hates. I guess Hitler would have been more intolerant towards communist ideology than even democracy. But what this non-aggression pact did was it guaranteed, on paper anyways, that Germany and Russia would not fight each other in the event of any kind of a war. And this right here was to last for 10 years. And so we know that appeasement didn't work. And last time we fought Germany in World War I, the two-front war thing was really kind of worked in the Allies' favor pretty well. So what this meant was that there could be no two-front war like there was before. So if you fought against Germany, you would have to fight them on one front, the West versus basically Central Europe, because the Axis powers are kind of all within the center here. And so it would get rid of that whole two-front war that we really banked on last time. And so Hitler and Stalin agreed that they're going to also begin a series of conquests in this region right here. And they're going to split the way that those conquests take place. And so what they did was Poland was divided. Poland was divided between Germany on the east, on the west, and the USSR on the east, and also the Soviets would take basically all of this as well. So that's a lot of territory. That's a very aggressive thing to do, just like Hitler and Mussolini were taking territory, and we consider them an aggressor nation. Well, the Soviet Union was pretty much doing the same thing leading into the war. And so Poland, we just mentioned all that. So part of Germany's plan to unite all Germans into one territory was this idea of collecting more living space, and that's what this word Lebensraum means, is living space. All right. We talked about the organic theory last time. Well, that's what this is all centered on. Okay, so I can just write organic theory next to this. All right. So the way this is going to work out is Germany's going to start to go through with these conquests, and they want to employ a new military strategy. In World War I, it was the von Schlieffen plan, and in this war, blitzkrieg is going to be the new strategy. And the word blitzkrieg literally means lightning war, and so they wanted to really hit hard, hit fast, hit strong, and they wanted to end the fight really, really fast and just conquer. So the battle should have been over with in maybe a few hours to a few days. And they were going to use their airplanes, tanks, and infantry in order to quickly subdue the enemy and cause a fast surrender. And this actually worked very, very well in these territories where they were conquering. Okay, the Soviets conquered Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Finland, all these places in Eastern Europe, right next to the border between, I guess, where you see Russia and the West. Finland put up strong resistance. The Russians did have a little bit of a harder time putting that down, but Germany's blitzkrieg worked very, very well for them. And so Britain and France at this point, they're gonna stop this policy of appeasement, and they're going to declare a war. At this point, Neville Chamberlain is going to be replaced, and as Prime Minister by Winston Churchill, who is this guy right here. All right, and then Sitzkrieg begins to occur. Sitzkrieg, which is a kind of a word for phony war, or everyone's just kind of sitting around. So after Poland, it seemed like nothing was going to happen. So all this, we declared war. What's the next step? And it almost seemed like a joke to the troops who were just sitting there waiting for something. But then all of a sudden, Germany attacks Norway and Denmark. Now this here is a Scandinavian country, so that would be, here's Denmark, here's Norway. So that right there is what Germany's doing, is they're going north and attacking them, as you can see by the arrows there. And meanwhile, the French are just kind of sitting along this line right here between their border. And what you see happening is you've got this very thick forest in Belgium called the Ardennes Woods, or Ardennes Forest. So what Germany did was they attacked the Netherlands and Belgium, and they did this as a diversion. They sent a large force actually through the Ardennes Forest, which is the last place the French thought they were going to go through. They were completely caught off guard by this because, you got to think, this is a very dense forest, as we just said. It didn't seem like this would make sense for an invasion to happen. So obviously they expected the invasion right here on what they called the Maginot Line, a very, very, very heavily fortified area where just a ton of troops that were ready for it. They're waiting for it at the front door, not in the back bathroom window somewhere, but that's not where it came through. So Germans avoided the fortified Maginot Line, and what they did was they were able to cut off the forces and really beat the heck out of France. And so you have the French military really kind of being cornered at Dunkirk, and this here is going to be a very a big battle. Not even really a battle, but like the process by which the French are going to try to flee and get away before they get just completely obliterated. And this right here is what you're looking at. All right, this here is the English Channel, and what's basically what you have is the Nazis are coming in on all sides, and they're gonna surround and destroy the French. And so the idea here isn't even to put up a resistance and a counterattack. The idea here is to get to safety by going to England. Because at this point, France is done. They just recently made a movie about this in the last few years. And so really this here is going to be the fall of France. Blitzkrieg absolutely worked with France. Meanwhile, Winston Churchill is looking at him, at what's going on here. The English are like, it's over 9,000, right? Germany completely did, their Blitzkrieg strategy against France, and it worked very, very well. Charles de Gaulle, who was a French government man, set up kind of a government in exile in London, and continued to try to persuade the French to put up a resistance against the German, who at this point had been occupying, or are now going to be occupying, France. So France didn't really last that long in World War II, just to put that out there. And at this point of the battle, or at this point of the war, really it's kind of the British against everybody, right? Because you think about it, the Soviets aren't going to be any help this time. Scandinavian countries are conquered. Italy is allied with Germany, and many of the other countries in that area are gonna align themselves to the Axis power. So either you're conquered or you're in line with Hitler, and then you're Britain. And so Hitler saw this as an opportunity to crush the British. And so here's what we're going to start out as with the Battle of Britain. If you guys have ever seen the first Chronicles of Narnia movie, that's what's going on at that time. And you got the London's being bombed all the time, and the people would have to continually kind of run for shelter. Hitler's plan was to destroy the Royal Air Force, and so he targeted airfields, and he also targeted factories because he wanted to wreck their industries. He later on, though, didn't see that. He thought that this was not very, very effective, all right, and because it didn't seem like it was working out very well. And so he switched his strategy and then trying to crush the British people by, at this point, bombing the cities. And there's where you start to see civilians having to run for cover. Now, Winston Churchill had this big, glorious speech where he's kind of like, "We shall never surrender." Right? You can go on YouTube and see that. By the way, I say it facetiously, but that's a very good speech. You really ought to take your time to listen to it. It's still quoted all the time. You're going to study in history. Winston Churchill was very much a powerful orator, and he could do many things and move many people to action with his amazing words. So I absolutely recommend you go and watch that. The British also had used a new technology called radar during this battle. And so what they had discovered is that, with the use of the radar, you're able to anticipate when the attacks are going to happen so as to prepare. They also had this German code-making invention known as Enigma that they were able to smuggle out or get a hold of somehow, which enabled them to decipher German codes. So between radar and Enigma, the British have huge advantage. Whenever there would be an attack, they were able to kind of gather their wits and go about it in a strategic way so as to lose less and do more damage against the German Luftwaffe, which is their air force. And so they knew what Germany was planning, and this is really what's going to make Hitler give up on trying to take Britain. And by May 1941, after trying for a year, he goes after a new strategy called Operation Barbossa. I'll give you a hint. It was a stupid thing to do, all right? And we're going to learn about that in just a minute. But meanwhile, Africa, you got the British and the Germans, also the Italians they're fighting in northern Africa. And in this case, really at first, it's really going to be a battle between the British and the Italians. And this was going on during the period we just talked about, the Battle of Britain. But the British are going to go in and attack against Mussolini's forces. All right, and by February 1941, they were just really kicking Italy around in North Africa. And so Germany, in order to go and help Mussolini out, Mussolini's military, by the way, was just really second rate compared to Germany's. And so he sends Erwin Rommel, a really good strategic commander, over to the area to control the forces against the British in northern Africa. And this is going to turn the tide of the battle towards the Axis powers. And by 1942, it kind of flip-flopped again in British favor. But then finally by June of that same year, you got Germany once again kind of in command. Rommel ends up taking Tobruk, which was a strong British, a British stronghold, which was a crushing blow to the Allies. Now, Rommel, you might know him as the Desert Fox. And this one here is the guy. He was known for his strategic capacity. I mean, he was very victorious in his battles against the British during this period, and it earned him the nickname. The Balkans, which is the region where Greece is, okay, this little area here is known as the Balkans. Sometimes it's known as Balkan Peninsula, because believe it or not, it is actually a peninsula. But we talked earlier about how the Balkans just has all these different ethnic groups that are all very, very different on a national level from one another. And so it's kind of always been a hotbed for ethnic conflict anyway. And many of these groups wanted their own country, and they fueled these desires with nationalistic fervor. And so they sided more so with Hitler, and the fascists. And so what they did was Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, they end up joining the Axis powers. Yugoslavia and Greece, which also was very, very diverse, I might also add, were straight conquered by the Axis powers, okay? And so this region here was designed to be a later stronghold that the Germans could use in order to get at the Russians, all right? And so all that brings us back to Operation Barbossa. I do think I'm going to go ahead and cover this, make a long video, but just go ahead and knock it all out. So Operation Barbossa, if you remember earlier up there, I mentioned this right here was stupid, all right, on behalf of the Germans, because what it was is it basically entailed an invasion of the USSR. So if you remember back maybe a few units, we were talking about Napoleon trying to do this. He ends up going and taking his troops into the freezing cold Russia, and the result of this is that his troops ended up scrambling. They were ill prepared for the Russian winter, and they died, right? Well, you remember that the Non-Aggression Pact, I'll just write NAP, the Non-Aggression Pact was formed somewhat of an alliance, or at least a ceasefire, Well, no, I'd say more like an alliance between the Germans and the Soviets. It was an agreement where they would not fight each other. So you can imagine that, well, the Soviets were probably pretty caught off guard by the fact that now they are, in fact, warding off an invasion of the Germans. And so, what they did was they responded with the same scorched earth strategy that they used against Napoleon all those years ago. So as the Soviets retreated from the oppressive German army they couldn't beat, they burned everything up so that the Germans couldn't live off the land, more or less. By November, Leningrad was under siege. All right, and what the strategy was here is the German forces wanted to starve the military and the people into submission, have them give up. So almost 1 million people died here. There was only about 2.5 million in the city. So we're talking about just under half, maybe a little more than a third of the people in the city perished due to this blockade that the Germans had on Leningrad. So the Germans then pivoted towards Moscow. It starts to get cold, okay? So they hadn't done it fast enough. Now you got the Russian winter on the cusp, and the Germans are not prepared for that kind of cold. They're in summer uniforms. They're just not ready for what they're getting themselves into. And then from up top, there was a no retreat. So they were being told by Hitler they needed to stay put and continue to put the pressure on these cities and on the Russians. And finally, by March, which is like early spring, still really, really freakishly cold, by March 1943, that's when Germany was finally able to carry out a retreat. And so, really, Operation Barbossa, what that did was it ended the Non-Aggression Pact, and it really didn't do anything else other than to give the Allies another ally. So now, keep in mind here that when we're talking about communists, and Western ideology, there's a big difference in how between the two. We didn't like communism, and we fought against it before this time. So we didn't like Stalin. We weren't friends. We were allies because the friend of your the enemy of your enemy is your friend, right? It's more like that mentality right there. And so at this point, and you start to see a two-front war being fought against the Germans, and it starts to look like maybe the tide of battle could be changed. It may be too early to say still at this point. But in the United States, there's going to be a changing attitude, okay? So people we sympathize in the United States with Western Europe. We have a lot of historical connection with, in particular, the British. We speak the same language. We have the same basic Judeo-Christian cultural background and history. And so we tended to kind of be more sympathetic towards the British and the French during this whole thing. And even though we're not going to directly fight in the war, we really do want the British and the French to win. All right. Not even a sale of arms under the Neutrality Acts, or the Neutrality Acts here, just to kind of give you some context, was parliamentary act. We passed an act saying that we're not going to get involved. Not I say parliamentary, an act of Congress. We are saying we're not going to get involved in what's going on over there, not even with the sale of arms to warring countries. But because we were sympathetic, we and we also knew that we'd be in trouble if allies fell because we were trade partners with these countries. We established also the Lend-Lease Act, which would allow us to sell to countries that were vital to the United States economy. So our big trade partners, we justify it like that and kind of made a loophole in the law so we were able to do business with them. Now, another side of this too is that, if we do business with these countries and they owe us money because of loans or whatnot, if they fall, we're not going to get that back. Another thing too you gotta know is that Roosevelt and Churchill were having secret meetings, and one of these secret meetings, the Atlantic Charter kind of becomes a thing. And what this was these talks kind of manifested themselves into what would kind of become the framework for a peace plan in the event that, I guess, assuming that the Allies were going to win. And what this did was it upheld upheld free trade. Okay, it's kind of an issue that's central to the United States, and it also upholds the right of people to choose their own government. Which would kind of put an end to these aggressor nations and their ideas of conquest for against their neighbors. And so these things happened. This is really maybe the first wave of the war. In the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to look a little bit more at what's going on in Japan, and also start to think about or start to look at the U.S. involvement as the war carries on. Thanks for watching.